Chapter 2. The Scent of Betrayal. Welcome back to the Northern Knits Mysteries. The flour has settled at the Tart and tea, but the air is thick with more than just the smell of burnt sugar. As Rose stares at the empty safe, she realizes that some wounds and some betrayals never truly heal. Let's step into Chapter 2, The Scent of Betrayal. The morning after the break-in, Rose found herself staring at the empty shelf where her recipe book had lived for 3 years, the space now marked only by a rectangular patch of dust and the faint ghost of vanilla extract that seemed to cling to everything in her kitchen. She'd barely slept, her mind turning over the violation like fingers worrying at a dropped stitch, trying to understand how someone could walk into her sanctuary and steal the one thing that connected her to generations of Merriweather women. The bell above her bakery door chimed at precisely 8:30, and Rose looked up from her mechanical kneading to see Glenda Sterling pushing through the entrance with the determined stride of someone on a mission. Rain beaded on the shoulders of her sensible tweed coat, and her tortoiseshell glasses had fogged slightly from the transition between Manchester's November chill and the warm sanctuary of the Tart and tea. "I've been thinking about your situation all night," Glenda announced without preamble, settling her handbag on the counter with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years organizing library catalogs. The police response was thoroughly inadequate. Rose managed a weak smile as she shaped another batch of morning rolls. They said there wasn't much they could do without any leads. Just one of those things, apparently. Nonsense. Glenda removed her glasses and cleaned them with brisk efficiency. Theft of family heirlooms isn't one of those things. It's a crime with motivation, method, and opportunity. The perpetrator chose your establishment specifically, which suggests premeditation rather than random vandalism. The familiar rhythm of Glenda's academic precision brought Rose an unexpected comfort. In the long hours between midnight and dawn, she'd felt utterly alone with her loss, but now she remembered why she'd grown so fond of the retired librarian over their months of shared Thursday evenings. Glenda approached problems like rare manuscripts requiring careful analysis and systematic investigation. "You think someone planned this?" Rose asked, pausing in her work to really look at her friend. Glenda's gray eyes held the sharp focus she'd once brought to tracking down obscure historical references for demanding scholars. "I think someone knew exactly what they were looking for." Glenda accepted the cup of tea Rose slid across the counter, her fingers warming against the ceramic. "Consider the evidence. They ignored the till, left your expensive mixing equipment untouched, and bypassed obvious valuables to locate a single book. That level of specificity suggests intimate knowledge of both your inventory and the item's significance." Rose felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the helpless knot that had formed when the young constable had shrugged and muttered about insurance claims. Glenda's systematic approach made the crime feel less like a random cruelty and more like a puzzle with solutions waiting to be discovered. The bell chimed again, and Arthur Penhaligon stumped through the door, shaking droplets from his flat cap with the practiced motion of someone who'd spent decades walking Manchester streets in all weather. His weathered face bore the grim expression Rose had come to associate with serious police business, though she reminded herself that Arthur had been retired for 5 years, and his current authority extended only to the occasional neighborhood watch meeting. "Heard about your trouble, lass?" he said, his northern accent softening the formal words. "Proper disgrace, that is. 40 years on the force, and I can tell you, they're not putting the effort in like they should." Rose poured him tea without being asked, noting how his thick gray mustache twitched with suppressed indignation. Arthur had taken his role as unofficial neighborhood guardian seriously since retirement, treating every minor crime as a personal affront to the community he'd served for 4 decades. "Glenda thinks it was planned," Rose said, watching Arthur's expression sharpen with professional interest. "Course it was planned." Arthur settled onto one of the mismatched chairs Rose had collected over the years, his worn police-issue shoes squeaking slightly against the old floorboards. Random thieves go for cash and electronics, not family cookbooks. This were someone who knew what they were after. Glenda leaned forward, her academic instincts engaging with Arthur's street experience. The question becomes, how did they acquire such specific knowledge of Rose's possession? The book wasn't displayed publicly, and Rose hasn't mentioned it to casual customers. "Been thinking about that myself," Arthur admitted, accepting a warm scone from Rose's morning batch. "Could be someone who's been in here regular-like, observing, or could be someone with connections to your family, Rose. Either way, it's not a stranger's crime." Rose considered this as she watched the rain streak down her front windows, blurring the red brick buildings of the northern quarter into impressionist smears of color. The idea that someone she knew might have violated her trust felt worse than random theft, but Arthur and Glenda's logic was sound. A stranger wouldn't have known about the recipe book's existence, let alone its location in her private kitchen. "There's another consideration," Glenda continued, pulling a small notebook from her handbag with the fluid motion of someone who'd been taking research notes for 50 years. "The timing isn't coincidental. The Christmas market applications were due last week, and Rose submitted her traditional recipes for the Heritage Food Stall. Someone may have learned about the book's contents through that process." Arthur's mustache bristled with renewed interest. "Now that's proper detective work, that is. Who else applied for food stalls? Who'd have access to those applications?" Rose felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. "The market committee reviews all the applications together. There's usually about 8 people on it, plus whoever handles the paperwork at the council offices." "We need a list," Glenda said, her pen poised over the notebook. "Names, connections to the food industry, any previous interactions with Rose or her recipes." The bell chimed once more, and Rose looked up to see Daisy Chen pushing through the door backward, her arms laden with what appeared to be an entire computer setup. Her highlighted hair was damp with rain, and her vintage band T-shirt bore the evidence of Manchester's perpetual drizzle. But her energy crackled through the bakery like electricity. "Auntie Rose, I brought my laptop and the portable printer and my good camera," Daisy announced, depositing her technological arsenal on the nearest table. "We're going to solve this properly. I've already started a spreadsheet." Rose blinked at her honorary niece, the daughter of her closest friend who'd returned to Manchester after her London startup collapsed. A spreadsheet? For tracking suspects, clues, timeline, everything. Daisy's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard with practiced efficiency. "I know you 3 think I'm all modern and digital, but investigation is just research, and research is data organization. Plus, I can cross-reference social media, check public records online, all the things that take you lot hours to do at the library." Arthur and Glenda exchanged a look that contained 40 years of combined experience with traditional investigative methods, but Rose saw them both nod with grudging respect. Daisy's generation might approach problems differently, but her enthusiasm was infectious. "What we need," Arthur said slowly, "is to work this like a proper case, interview witnesses, examine the scene, follow up on leads. Just because the police can't be bothered doesn't mean the crime can't be solved." Precisely. Glenda's academic authority merged seamlessly with Arthur's police experience. We have the local knowledge, the community connections, and the personal motivation that official investigators often lack. Rose looked around at the three faces surrounding her, each animated by the prospect of investigation. Arthur's professional pride had been stirred by the challenge of the case he'd never had during his career. Glenda's research instincts had found a mystery worthy of her analytical skills. Daisy's technological capabilities offered modern tools to complement traditional methods. "You want to investigate this yourselves?" Rose asked, though she could already feel her own curiosity awakening. The helpless frustration of the morning was transforming into something more purposeful. "Not just investigate," Daisy said, her eyes bright with possibility. "Document everything. If we solve this properly with evidence and methodology, it proves that community knowledge and local connections can succeed where official channels fail. Plus, I can blog about it, build my vintage business profile, show that traditional skills and modern tools work better together." Glenda adjusted her glasses with the precision of someone settling into a familiar research routine. "We'll need to establish clear protocols, document all findings, maintain chain of evidence, ensure our investigation doesn't compromise any potential legal proceedings." Arthur nodded approvingly. "Can't just go charging about like amateurs. This needs to be done proper, with attention to detail and respect for the law." Rose felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced since her husband died and she'd been forced to navigate the world alone. These three people, each dealing with their own challenges and disappointments, were willing to dedicate their time and skills to recovering her family's legacy. "Where do we start?" she asked. Daisy's laptop chimed with an incoming email, and she glanced at the screen before her expression shifted to excitement. "Actually, I might have already started. I put out some feelers on the local Facebook groups last night, asked if anyone had seen unusual activity around the northern quarter. Mrs. Patterson from Oldham Street says she saw someone hanging around the back alley behind here around midnight, but she couldn't make out details in the rain." "That's useful," Arthur said, leaning forward with renewed interest. "What else?" "Someone posted in the Manchester History group asking about old recipe collections, specifically mentioning traditional Lancashire baking. Posted 3 days ago by an account called textile_heritage_collector. Daisy's fingers flew across her keyboard. "The post got deleted this morning, but I screenshot everything as a matter of course when I'm researching vintage items." Glenda's pen scratched rapidly across her notebook. Textile Heritage Collector suggests someone with interests beyond mere recipes. Lancashire's baking traditions are intimately connected to the textile industry. Workers' meals, mill owners entertaining, harvest celebrations in cotton farming communities. "Could be a collector," Arthur mused, "someone who specializes in industrial heritage items. Rose, your recipe book would be valuable to someone building a comprehensive collection of textile region artifacts." Rose tried to remember if she'd mentioned the book's connection to her family's textile history. Her great-grandmother had developed many of the recipes to feed workers at the Merriweather Mill, adapting traditional dishes to provide maximum nutrition for families earning textile wages. I did mention that on my market application, she admitted, about the recipes coming from mill families and how they represent authentic working-class food heritage from the industrial period. Daisy's laptop chimed again, and she scanned the new information with increasing excitement. The Heritage Society has been advertising for donations to their upcoming exhibition on Lancashire textile history. They're specifically looking for domestic artifacts that show how industrial workers lived and ate. Now we're getting somewhere, Arthur said with satisfaction. Heritage organizations, collectors, market committee members. We've got a proper suspect pool developing. Glenda stood and moved to the bakery's front window, her analytical gaze sweeping the street outside. We need to examine the crime scene properly. The police may have missed crucial details during their cursory investigation. Rose led them through to her kitchen, noting how different it felt with 4 people crowded into the space she usually inhabited alone. Arthur immediately knelt beside the back door, his experienced eye taking in details the young constable had overlooked. "Locks not forced," he observed, running his fingers around the frame. "Either they had a key or they're skilled at picking locks. Given the rain last night, any footprints outside will be mostly washed away, but let's have a look anyway." Daisy had her camera out, documenting everything with the thoroughness of someone who understood the importance of visual evidence. "I'll create a digital crime scene record. We can refer back to these images if we need to spot changes or notice details we missed initially." Glenda examined the empty shelf where the recipe book had lived, her librarian's instincts focused on the organization of the surrounding space. Nothing else appears to have been disturbed. The thief knew exactly where to look, which suggests they'd observed your routine, Rose. "When do you typically access the book?" "Thursday evenings, mostly," Rose replied, thinking back over her weekly patterns. "When I'm planning special items for the weekend or if someone requests a traditional recipe. Sometimes I'll check it during the day if a customer asks about family history behind certain items." "So anyone who frequented the bakery during those times would have seen you retrieve it," Arthur concluded. "We need to think about regular customers, delivery people, anyone who might have been here when you accessed the book." Daisy looked up from her photography. "What about the knitting circle? Don't you meet here Thursday evenings? Would any of them have seen the book?" Rose felt an uncomfortable twist in her stomach. The Thursday evening knitting circle had been her salvation after moving to Manchester, a group of women and men who'd welcomed her into their community with warmth and acceptance. The idea that one of them might have betrayed her trust seemed impossible. "They all know about the book," she admitted reluctantly. "I've made special items for circle members using family recipes, but I can't believe any of them would—" "We can't rule anyone out," Arthur said gently but firmly. "Doesn't mean we suspect them, just means we investigate thoroughly. Elimination is as important as identification in police work." Glenda had moved to the back door and was examining the frame with scholarly precision. "Arthur, come look at this. There are small scratches around the lock that appear fresh and what looks like residue from some kind of lubricant." Arthur joined her, his weathered fingers tracing the marks she'd indicated. Professional job, this. Someone who knew what they were doing and came prepared. This weren't an opportunistic crime. It was planned and executed by someone with skills. "Or someone who watched a few YouTube tutorials," Daisy added pragmatically, though she photographed the scratches from multiple angles. You'd be surprised what people can learn online these days. Rose watched her three amateur investigators working with increasing coordination, their different skills complementing each other naturally. Arthur's police experience provided structure and methodology. Glenda's research background ensured systematic documentation, and Daisy's technological fluency opened investigative possibilities that wouldn't have occurred to the others. "I think we should check the back alley," Arthur suggested. "Rain or no rain might be something the thief dropped or left behind." They trooped outside into Manchester's persistent drizzle, the November chill seeping through their clothes despite the early hour. Rose's small backyard gave way to a narrow alley that ran behind the entire row of Northern Quarter buildings, providing access for deliveries and waste collection. Daisy held an umbrella over her camera while documenting the area, and Glenda methodically examined the ground near Rose's back gate. Arthur followed what he claimed was the likely route a thief would have taken, though to Rose's untrained eye, the wet pavement revealed nothing useful. "Here," Glenda called from beside a large wheelie bin, something partially hidden under the refuse container. Arthur hurried over, and Rose saw him carefully extract what appeared to be a small wooden object, using a handkerchief to avoid contaminating potential fingerprints. Even in the gray morning light, she could see it was carved with intricate details. "It's a button," Daisy said, moving closer with her camera. "Wooden, hand-carved by the look of it. Is that a B pattern?" Glenda accepted the button from Arthur, examining it through her glasses with the intensity she'd once brought to authenticating historical documents. "Definitely hand-carved, probably 19th century based on the tool marks and wood aging. The design appears to be a B, surrounded by what might be cotton bolls or wool fleece." Rose felt something stir in her memory, a half-recalled association that hovered just beyond conscious recollection. "I've seen that pattern before, but I can't remember where." "Textile symbolism," Glenda continued, her academic expertise engaging fully. Bees represented industry and hard work, common motifs in mill-owner families' personal items. The surrounding pattern suggests cotton or wool processing. This would have been from a high-quality garment, probably a coat or waistcoat belonging to someone of considerable status in the textile industry. Arthur wrapped the button carefully in his handkerchief. This didn't fall off some random vandal's jacket. Someone wearing Victorian textile industry regalia was in this alley recently, and I'm willing to bet it was our thief. Daisy was already typing rapidly on her phone. "I'm Googling textile industry symbols and button patterns. If this is from a specific mill or family, there might be historical records that can help us identify the owner." Rose looked at the three faces surrounding her, each animated by the discovery of their first concrete clue. The helpless frustration of the morning had completely evaporated, replaced by a sense of purposeful activity that reminded her of the satisfaction she'd once found in solving complex recipe adaptations. "What's our next step?" she asked. Glenda consulted her notebook, where she'd been methodically recording their findings. "We need to research the button's origins, compile our suspect list based on market committee members and heritage collectors, and establish a timeline of who had opportunity to observe Rose's routines. I'll check with my contacts at Greater Manchester Police," Arthur added. "See if there have been other thefts of historical items recently. Sometimes thieves develop patterns, target similar objects for private collectors or black market dealers." Daisy held up her phone, where she'd pulled up what appeared to be an auction website. I'm monitoring online sales of Lancashire textile memorabilia. If your recipe book appears for sale, we'll know about it immediately. Plus, I can track who's been actively buying similar items recently. Rose felt a surge of affection for these three people who'd transformed her private tragedy into a collaborative investigation. Each brought skills and perspectives she lacked, and together they'd already discovered more useful information than the official police investigation. "There's something else," she said, the half-remembered association finally crystallizing into conscious memory. "That bee pattern. I think I've seen it on someone's coat. Recently, within the past few weeks." Arthur's eyes sharpened with professional interest. "Can you remember who? Or when?" Rose closed her eyes, trying to reconstruct recent encounters. The bakery saw dozens of customers each day, and faces often blurred together in her memory. But distinctive clothing sometimes lingered longer than individual features. "Someone well-dressed," she said slowly. "Expensive coat, very proper speaking voice." They asked specific questions about traditional Lancashire recipes, particularly ones connected to textile worker families. Glenda and Arthur exchanged meaningful looks. "That's quite specific," Glenda observed. "Most casual customers ask about ingredients or prices, not historical connections." "Did they buy anything?" Daisy asked, her phone ready to record whatever details Rose could provide. "A selection of items," Rose replied, her memory growing clearer as she focused on the interaction. But they seemed more interested in the stories behind the recipes than the actual food. Asked about my sources, whether I had access to original family documents. Arthur's mustache bristled with suspicion. They were casing the joint love, gathering intelligence about your recipe collection to plan their theft. Rose shivered, though whether from the November cold or the realization that she'd been deliberately targeted, she couldn't say. The idea that someone had manipulated her natural friendliness and pride in her heritage to facilitate their crime felt particularly violating. "We need to get you inside before you catch your death," Glenda said practically, noting Rose's pallor. "We can continue our planning in comfort, with proper tea and some of those excellent scones I saw cooling earlier." They retreated to the bakery's warmth, where Rose automatically set about preparing fresh tea, while her mind continued processing the morning's revelations. The familiar ritual of brewing, measuring, and serving helped ground her in the present moment while her three companions settled around her small dining area. "Right then," Arthur said, accepting his cup with satisfied appreciation. "We've got physical evidence, witness testimony, and a developing suspect profile. This is more progress than most cases see in their first week." Daisy had her laptop open again, fingers flying across the keyboard as she organized their findings into what appeared to be a comprehensive digital case file. "I'm creating separate tabs for suspects, evidence, timeline, and background research. Everything cross-referenced and searchable." "Methodologically sound," Glenda approved, though Rose suspected the retired librarian would have preferred a more traditional paper-based system. "We should establish regular meeting times to share information and coordinate our individual investigations." Rose looked around at her unlikely team of amateur detectives, each bringing their own motivations to the investigation. Arthur sought the major case that had eluded him during his police career. Glenda wanted to prove her analytical skills remained sharp despite retirement. Daisy needed to build her reputation while honoring traditional values. And Rose herself? She needed to recover her family's legacy before it disappeared forever into some private collector's hoard. "Thursday evenings," she said impulsively. "The knitting circle usually meets then anyway. We can investigate during the week and compare notes every Thursday." "Perfect," Arthur agreed. "Gives us a proper schedule, keeps us organized like a real investigation team." Daisy's phone buzzed with an incoming message, and her expression shifted to excitement as she read. "Mrs. Patterson just sent me more details about what she saw last night. The person in the alley was carrying something rectangular under their coat, and they had a distinctive walk. Very upright, like someone trying to project authority or importance." "Military bearing?" Arthur suggested. "Or someone from a professional background who's used to commanding respect?" "Could be," Daisy replied, typing a response. She also said they were wearing what looked like expensive shoes, even in the rain. Someone who prioritizes appearance over practicality. Glenda made additional notes in her notebook, her systematic approach ensuring nothing would be forgotten. "We're developing a consistent profile, someone well-dressed, knowledgeable about textile history, professionally confident, and skilled enough to pick locks without forcing entry." Rose tried to match this description to faces from her memory, but the characteristics seemed frustratingly generic. Half the customers at Manchester's upscale establishments might fit such a profile, particularly among the city's substantial population of heritage enthusiasts and antique collectors. "The B button is our strongest lead," Arthur concluded. "Victorian textile industry symbolism narrows our suspect pool considerably. Not many people wear clothing with such specific historical connections." "Unless it's reproduction clothing," Daisy pointed out. "Vintage and steampunk fashion often incorporates Victorian industrial motifs. Someone could have acquired the button from a costume supplier or reproduction specialist." Glenda considered this possibility, her academic instincts weighing evidence carefully. The button appeared authentically aged, but reproduction techniques have become quite sophisticated. We'll need expert authentication to be certain of its origins. Rose felt the complexity of their investigation expanding beyond her initial hopes for simple recovery of her stolen property. Each answer seemed to generate new questions. Each clue suggested multiple interpretations. Each line of inquiry branched into additional possibilities, requiring investigation. "I think I know someone who can help with the button," she said, remembering a customer who'd mentioned expertise in textile history. "Professor Carruthers from the university. She's researched Lancashire industrial heritage for years, and she's been in here several times asking about traditional worker recipes." Arthur's expression sharpened immediately. "She's been asking about your recipes? Specifically about historical connections?" "Well, yes," Rose replied, then paused as the implications sank in. "Oh, you think she might be—" "We don't think anything yet," Glenda corrected firmly. "We investigate thoroughly and follow the evidence wherever it leads. Professor Carruthers could be a valuable expert witness, or she could be a person of interest, or both simultaneously." Daisy had already pulled up what appeared to be the university's website, scrolling through faculty profiles with practiced efficiency. Dr. Margaret Carruthers, Department of Social History, specializes in industrial heritage and working-class culture, published extensively on textile industry social structures. "Sounds like exactly the sort of person who'd value Rose's recipe book," Arthur observed grimly. Or exactly the sort of person who'd help us authenticate our evidence and understand the historical context, Glenda countered. We need to approach this systematically, without allowing suspicion to cloud our judgment. Rose appreciated Glenda's measured perspective, though she couldn't deny feeling a pang of disappointment at the possibility that someone she'd enjoyed chatting with might have betrayed her trust. Professor Carruthers had seemed genuinely interested in the social history behind traditional recipes, asking thoughtful questions about how working families had adapted their cooking to industrial schedules and limited resources. The morning had passed without Rose noticing, and she realized her lunch customers would begin arriving within the hour. She needed to return to the business of running her bakery, though her mind would undoubtedly remain focused on the investigation. "I should start preparing for the lunch rush," she said reluctantly, part of her wanting to continue their detective work indefinitely. "Of course, love," Arthur replied, standing and settling his flat cap back into place. "We'll all do our individual research during the week and meet back here Thursday evening to compare notes. I'll research the button's origins and any similar items that have appeared in recent auctions or sales," Glenda added, tucking her notebook into her handbag with characteristic precision. "And I'll monitor online activity, cross-reference our suspect list with social media profiles, and see what I can discover about recent thefts of historical items," Daisy concluded, packing her technological arsenal with efficient movements. Rose watched her 3 amateur detectives prepare to leave, each energized by their shared purpose and the satisfying discovery of their first concrete clue. The morning had transformed her sense of helpless violation into purposeful activity, and she felt more optimistic about recovering her family's recipe collection than she had since discovering the theft. As they prepared to brave Manchester's persistent drizzle once again, Arthur paused beside the door and turned back to Rose with an expression of renewed determination. "We'll get your book back, lass," he said with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 40 years making similar promises to victims of crime. "Might take some time and effort, but we'll get to the bottom of this." Rose smiled, feeling the warmth of community support that had drawn her to Manchester despite the grief of losing her family home. "Thank you all. I can't tell you how much this means to me." After they left, Rose stood in her kitchen holding the muddy footprint cast Daisy had insisted on making and the carefully wrapped B button that might hold the key to identifying her thief. The bakery felt different now, charged with purpose and possibility rather than violated by loss. She had work to do, customers to serve, and a business to maintain. But she also had a mystery to solve, and for the first time since her husband's death, she felt part of something larger than her individual struggles. The Northern Knits Mystery Circle had found their first case, and Rose intended to see it through to its conclusion, whatever secrets that distinctive wooden button might reveal about the person who'd stolen her family's legacy.